Hello everyone. In today's video, instead of talking about driver performance or talent, I'm going to be investigating the different characters who have achieved success in Formula 1 by winning in our great sport using an alignment chart. This alignment chart doesn't just focus on driver attitude, personality and work ethic, but it also focuses on how they're perceived by the fans. And also, I have slightly stolen this video concept from Slapshoes, who is a great YouTuber in his own right, so before anyone calls me out on that, I'll say it myself. And with that, let's get into this video. The most well-liked and universally respected drivers who consistently produce good results are the ones who end up in the Lawful Good section of this alignment chart. Drivers who keep their heads down, do what's right, and beat everyone else in the process. For me, the perfect essence of Lawful Good is the late Jim Clark. By all accounts, he was a soft, kind gentleman off track, and on track he kept that same level of fair respect, although he often wouldn't need to worry about other drivers in battle, because he'd often be so far up the road that no one could catch him. His drives in Spa in 1963, and in Monza in 1967 in particular, stand out to me, as they showed his sheer speed. In the former, he pulled out 5 minutes over second place over the course of a race on one of the most dangerous circuits in F1 history in equally dangerous conditions. In Monza, 4 years later, after being lapped early on due to getting a puncture, he would get his lap back and catch back up to the leaders, taking the lead and then looking set for a win before he ran out of fuel. Not only was he a great driver, he was a very humble person who was never destined to be world champion, growing up on a farm in Scotland, and he often spent off-seasons catering to his farm rather than racing during the winter. No one who knew him has a bad word to say about him, and his early loss at age just 32 was a great tragedy for Formula 1. He was a great person and an even better driver. For me, there are two other drivers who fit nicely into this Lawful Good category, not because they always played by the rules, but because they forced a lot of changes regarding safety and rules in our great sport. Jackie Stewart is a truly great leader, and he, along with Dan Gurney and several others, pushed the race organisers and the governing bodies to make safety improvements in an era where racing drivers were seen as gladiators, and so there was always going to be animosity directed at such change. Jackie said he would often be called a wuss by people against his safety ideas, but I don't think I'd call someone who ended up in a barn trapped in a wrecked car in Spa in 1966 a wuss. He alone brought safety advancements in Formula 1 forward by a number of years, and his ability to rally his fellow drivers around him to push for change was shared by Niki Lauda. Known as either the Rat, due to his appearance, or the Calculator, for his ability to do long division in his head, Lauda was a calculated, smart driver in an era where most other drivers had a very gung-ho approach to driving and racing. He tried to stage a driver boycott of the 1976 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring Nordschleife, the race in which he nearly lost his life in a fiery accident. However, he lost the vote to cancel the race by 1. He was known for thinking outside the box and being aware in situations that most drivers weren't. So in 1982, when the FIA tried to sneak clauses into every driver's super license contract that gave considerable control to the teams at the expense of the drivers, Niki wasn't having it. By this point, he was more widely respected by the drivers, and he rallied the drivers together, staging a boycott which would not be threatened by any action taken by the FIA. They stayed in a hotel with mattresses on the floor, all banded together to stand against the FIA. Once the governing body had realised that their threats of race suspensions and fines towards the drivers weren't going to halt their protest, the FIA relented and gave Niki and the drivers what they wanted and deserved. But for me, the story that most sums up Niki Lauda's attitude and approach to life is the one that occurred outside of Formula 1. During and after his racing career, Lauda obtained a pilot's license and owned his own eponymous airline, Lauda Air. In 1991, one of his Boeing 767 aircraft crashed, killing over 200 passengers, and he personally joined the accident investigation, saying he wanted to help the families of the victims find answers. Boeing kept saying that the crash was caused by pilot error. However, Lauda, who attended the crash site himself, said that there was clearly a technical fault, as the thrust reversers were deployed on one side of the aircraft and not the other, which shouldn't happen. Boeing reiterated that their aeroplanes were completely safe, but when Lauda asked if he could fly a 767 full of journalists and deploy the thrust reversers in the same way they had been in the accident, Boeing told him he couldn't do it because it was unsafe. This proved to Lauda that the crash wasn't his airline's fault nor the pilot's fault, and it was Boeing who were trying to deflect blame from their own failures. Lauda stood up to one of the biggest companies in the world at the time and held them accountable, proving he had balls the size of planets. He's also one of only 2 drivers to beat Alain Prost as a teammate across the season, so even in his late career, his talent still shone through. Jim Clark was a humble farmer who happened to be a racer. Jackie Stewart and Niki Lauda were both drivers who happened to be some of the most sporting and stand-up people in the history of sport. They wouldn't stand for mediocrity or incompetence, and their work ethic was rewarded with 3 championships each. That trio of Clark, Stewart and Lauda are the good guys who everyone respects and wants to see do well, nowadays anyway. But who is on the opposite end of the spectrum? Which drivers have or used to have a large group of fans who despise them? Which drivers have lost respect due to their actions on circuit which supposedly went too far? For me, the epitome of chaotic evil of a devilish duo of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Any sensible F1 fan can see that both have massive driving capabilities that make them generational talents. However, they both have swarms of fans who totally despise the other. Now, I will admit, a lot of this comes from their on-track rivalry, which almost always throws up incidents, but also their career paths have taken similar trajectories. Both Lewis and Max came into the sport looking very young and baby-faced. Both were extremely aggressive and downright dangerous sometimes in the early years of their careers, namely Lewis in 2011 and Max in 2018, making enemies on track. However, they both cooled down as they matured into experienced drivers. They both had ups and downs, but the chaos and friction they bring on track really helps F1 put on a show for the fans. Their battle in 2021 really brought out the best and the worst in each of them, and it was scintillating to see 2 ultra-competitive, hyper-aggressive drivers go at it, and it often resulted in chaos. Seeing their crashes in Silverstone and Monza, and more minor altercations in Imola, Jeddah and co, showed they were both willing to put it all on the line to win. And there is only one other driver I can think of who won a Grand Prix who created more friction, drama and chaos on track than Max and Lewis. Ayrton Senna came into F1 off the back of an F3000 title battle with Martin Brundle, and instantly Ayrton showed his talent by getting several podiums in his Tolman, but it was in his later years when he developed his villain arc. He vetoed being teammate to Derek Warwick at Lotus in 1986, not wanting the Brit to try and sway the British team onto his side of the garage. This move, however, was mild when compared to what he cooked up with when he drove for McLaren. He and Alain Prost were stark opposites in their approaches to driving and racing. Prost fought his way through every single corner methodically and was smooth, calm and sensible. However, Senna would push more the limits of grip, often overdriving in an attempt to achieve the fastest race time possible, whereas Prost would just do the approach which required the slowest speed to win a race, being as pragmatic and as realistic as possible. Whereas Senna was more emotionally attached to his driving because he was Christian and close to God. He didn't just want to win, but he wanted to humiliate the other drivers, especially Prost. These massive character chasms created clashes within the team, and while Ayrton won 1988 fair and square, the 1989 season saw tensions boil over after that final race in Suzuka, and his rivalry with Prost continued into 1990 as Alain joined Ferrari. Wherever Senna went, drama followed. If he wanted to overtake you, he would intimidate you off the road by putting himself in a position where it was either let him by or crash with him. He was an evil bastard on track, but off it he was very compassionate, and that embodies his chaotic nature. If he truly was a nasty guy who only wanted to run everyone else off the road and drive carelessly, he would have left Eric Comas to die in Spa when he crashed out in practice, but he didn't. He was clearly very emotionally driven, wearing his heart on his sleeve, and that explains his chaotic and wild driving in racecraft. And while he may not have necessarily been an evil person during his career and in the media, he was often portrayed as the villain, whether rightly or wrongly. The same with both Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton in certain situations. However, that is why he, Max and Lewis all embody chaotic evil. Anyway, so we've seen the 2 extremes. Let's go for something a bit more central. In fact, let's see who's a truly neutral driver who's won at least one race. These are the drivers whose names I look up in a statistics sheet or in the passage of a book and just go, or simply glance over them. The first driver like this is Heikki Kovalainen. Heikki showed promise in Renault in 2007, picking up some very good results and beating the very experienced Giancarlo Fisichella. However, despite this great first season, his move to McLaren for 2008 was a real damp squib. He was meant to use this chance as a launch pad for something great and become the 4th Finnish champion in F1 history maybe. However, the only recollectable details about his stint in Woking were his pole position in Silverstone in 2008 and also his solitary F1 win, which should have been second place in Hungary after Felipe Massa's engine blew up with only a few laps left. 2009 accentuated the gap between Lewis and Heikki as the Finn couldn't even score a podium while Lewis won 2 races. Then, when he was booted out of McLaren and shipped off to Lotus, he actually showed some decent performances in the best equipped of the 3 new teams. However, he left full-time F1 at the end of 2012 before returning to the other Lotus team at the back end of 2013 after Kimi Raikkonen went to get back surgery. But Heikki just couldn't adapt in his 2 races and didn't score any points, ending his F1 career on a quiet note. He was very quiet and had unspectacular driving achievements, which makes him very neutral. The second true neutral driver on this list is Jean-Pierre Jabouille. Now, all the anoraks will be jumping out of their screens going, "He was the first turbo winner in F1, he's a pioneer," or something to that effect. Other than that snippet of F1 history, can anyone really name anything about him? I do lots of F1 quizzes online, and whether it's a winner's quiz or something that contains Jabouille, he's never someone I really think of much. I just acknowledge his existence. There is no doubt he's an accomplished driver. Anyone who can win 2 races clearly has lots of talent, but a lack of personality or outstanding driving style or ability puts him in this nondescript position. And the last driver I think of as a true neutral winner is Heinz-Harald Frentzen. He's probably the most talented of the 3 drivers in this segment. After a few years of Sauber gaining a reputation as a solid midfield contender, his Williams move basically drop-kicked his momentum out of a 10-story window as he only won 1 race, while Jacques Villeneuve, his teammate, won the championship in 1997. His lucky move to Jordan for 1999 meant that in the top of the midfield car he won 2 races, more than he did in his championship winning car. Admittedly, 1999 was very chaotic, with the normal winning candidates often blowing up, spinning out or breaking their legs, but his career never really kicked off after this boost. He joined 2 teams in 2 years that were in their final F1 seasons, Prost and Arrows in 2001 and 2002, then he moved back to his original Sauber team, bore 1 final podium before he retired. To be honest, he was a very capable driver in the midfield and in lower backmarker teams, but he seemed to falter in competitive cars. This, coupled with his lack of personality or outstanding feat, just like Jabouille and just like Kovalainen, put him down in this list as a true neutral. So, after the slightly boring true neutrals, let's get into the Lawful Evil drivers. These are the drivers who, for the most part, stayed within the reaches of a rulebook on track, but didn't mind being outspoken or outlandish off of it. Alain Prost, apart from in Suzuka in 1989, was very much a Lawful Evil kind of driver. He was smooth, calm, calculated and concise in the car, but he could be a very cynical guy, often using inter-team politics and the FIA to get a leg up on his opposition, most commonly in his iconic rivalry with Ayrton Senna, which often led to him being portrayed as a villain, because Senna's attitude and style was much more endearing to the fans. Even if Prost's villain-type personality was unjust, he didn't help himself. Still, he was a damned fast driver and was probably born into the wrong era, considering consistency is much more key nowadays than in previous years, considering the improvements in reliability and the removal of drop scores in the championships. He was calculated and his only goal was to win, regardless of who else it affected. Alain is a legend famed for his career-long consistency, but this is a polar opposite to the next Lawful Evil driver on this list. Sebastian Vettel's early years rising through the Red Bull program into stardom were messy. Incidents like Fuji in 2007 and Turkey in 2010 come to mind, but for the most part, he was brutally fast and relatively clean. Also, Seb never really endeared himself to the fans, and this is where his evil bit comes in. Sometimes he acted like an entitled, spoilt brat, and utter domination in 2 of his 4 title-winning years definitely didn't help. However, after he lost his stride in the turbo hybrid era, he lost his pace and sort of lost his bad boy reputation. There were a couple of wobbles in 2016, notably his fury directed towards Kvyat in China and Russia, and telling the late great Charlie Whiting to fuck off in Mexico. But for the most part, he kept his head down and kept his back end sliding out. His climate change activism, his mentoring role towards Mick Schumacher, and his general demeanour have pretty much changed his perception nowadays to a good guy. But it wouldn't feel right to put him in Lawful Good with the likes of Stewart and Lauda, and it's the same with Lawful Neutral. He's a great legend of the sport, but really was a wanker sometimes. Although he's now become the cool uncle of the F1 paddock, so this feels like the right place to put him. The last Lawful Evil driver in this list is Juan Pablo Montoya. JPM was loved by the fans for being super ballsy and having a no-nonsense attitude. He famously dive-bombed a three-time champion Michael Schumacher in just his third race to take the lead in Interlagos before Jos Verstappen realised that he could abuse Juan Pablo's rear wing more than he did to his own family. Outside of that, he won the first F1 race after 9/11 in Monza, standing atop the podium tower in joy. He challenged for the 03 title before the Ferrari Intelligence Association nerfed the Michelin tyres and won Williams' last race for 8 years before switching to McLaren and getting his arse handed to him by a prime Kimi Raikkonen. On track, Montoya was mostly clean and rarely got involved in incidents that were his fault. 2002 Sepang. And off track, he was very funny to listen to. Everyone knows such lines as, "Pwah, he didn't see me, no chance," the rising number Juan, and "fucking Raikkonen." And his evilish side really came out when someone pissed him off, which is why I put him here. He didn't stand for any bullshit, which is why I and most F1 fans love him. And he didn't care if you were Christian Albers or Michael Schumacher, he'd still overtake you however he wished. Now, we've looked at Lawful Evil and we've looked at Chaotic Evil. So what about Neutral Evil? How can someone have a descriptor that just reads evil? Now, if this list was for just F1 drivers instead of F1 winners, I'd go with Gary Brabham, who's a convicted paedophile, and maybe the various drivers who've been arrested or spent time in prison, like Bertrand Gachot, the guy who gave Michael Schumacher his F1 debut. However, those two examples didn't win any F1 races. Therefore, the only reasonable candidate for this alignment chart is Nelson Piquet. Now, before everyone slanders me saying that I'm just a bit woke, he was undoubtedly a great driver. However, the loose connection between his brain and his mouth meant he often burned bridges, whether it be with his teammates a la Nigel Mansell, compatriots like Ayrton Senna, or more recent world champions like Lewis Hamilton. He's widely condemned from the F1 paddock, whether rightly or wrongly, because he's a liability. And unlike other more outspoken drivers, like James Hunt and the like, Nelson didn't really have a big fan base nor a good personality to fall back on. I'm not going to diminish his on-track driving achievements, because that's not what this video is about, but he's definitely one of the most, not necessarily evil might be the wrong word to use, but he's definitely one of the most polarising, and he fits evil in the context of this video. After discussing the evilness of Nelson Piquet, let's move on to a less cynical note and move on to lawful neutral. Lawful neutral drivers are ones who never really put a foot wrong and consistently picked up good results, such as Ralf Schumacher. If his brother wasn't a record-shattering generational talent, I think Ralf could have gone on to achieve more in Formula 1. His debut years with Jordan showed promise, and once he moved to Williams to avoid the Irish team who wanted to prioritise the results of the worst driver in the team, Damon Hill, Ralf started to flourish, picking up wins and podiums when BMW came in, getting 7 wins before departing the team in 2005 when he was mired in the midfield. There weren't really any situations where he did much wrong. I mean, he crashed in Indianapolis 2 years running, but apart from that, his career was definitely one to be proud of, as long as he doesn't get jealous of Michael's achievements. Although you wouldn't exactly blame him for getting jealous of Michael's achievements, would you? Next up is Giancarlo Fisichella, another driver who could bring any machine to the top. He spent 2 years in Minardi and Jordan before moving to Benetton in 1998, where he would really put himself on the map, taking numerous podiums as well as pole position in Austria in 1998. His move back to Jordan in 2003 coincided with his first win, getting it in tricky conditions in what was the 9th fastest car that year. That was followed by a mild year of Sauber in 2004 before he went to Renault to partner the incumbent champion Fernando Alonso. He won the season open in Australia from pole and won in Sepang the year after, but he couldn't beat Heikki Kovalainen in 2007, so he was booted out of Renault and he joined the new Force India team, but failed to score any points all season for the first time in his F1 career since his part-time schedule in 1996 with Minardi. 2009 was much the same, until the Belgian Grand Prix when he took pole out of nowhere and finished second, having narrowly missed out on the win, giving Force India their first ever Formula 1 podium and their first ever Formula 1 points. He then moved to Ferrari for the rest of the season, replacing the bumbling and bundling Luca Badoa, although Fissi himself couldn't score any points. And that was it in terms of his F1 career. It ended swiftly, although he was Ferrari's reserve in 2010. Fissi was mega consistent if you ignore that one race in Melbourne in 2006 where he was 2 seconds a lap off of Fernando Alonso's pace, and was very much a midfield maestro. He could make the most of the midfield car. His lack of personality or exuberant Italian driving style, however, left him a fast but neutral driver. Another midfield maestro was France's own Olivier Panis. or Oliver Penis if your name is Richard Hammond. Panis started his career with Ligier in 1994, but then after 2 years of solid, sensible results, including a second place in Adelaide in 1995, where no drivers actually wanted to finish that race, his day of days came in 1996 in Monaco, where he won a race only 3 drivers finished. He was lucky, but it wasn't his fault. Everyone else around him either fell off the road or had failures or mishaps of their own. He started the 1997 season well, and after round 6 in Spain was third in the drivers' standings as the other front-running drivers lacked consistency. And Olivier had that said consistency. However, a crash in the Canadian Grand Prix broke both his legs and he would miss 7 races. Although, on his return, he would score points, so fair play. He stayed with Prost for 2 more seasons, then sat out 2000 before racing for the 2 years after that with BAR, before the team had gotten good, unfortunately. For 2003, he joined Toyota, where he stayed until the end of 2004, when his full-time F1 career came to a close. Panis clearly had bundles of talent and didn't rub people up the wrong way. However, a lack of pizzazz or personality makes him a perfect lawful neutral. We've just done lawful neutral. Now let's do chaotic neutral. There is a theme amongst these 3. They're all Italian, if you don't count one of them. So they're not all Italian, but you know what I mean. Italian drivers tend to come with an ire or an inkling of chaos, whether it's Vittorio Brambilla or Jarno Trulli. And speaking of those two, they're both in this segment. Brambilla was basically Andrea de Cesaris before Andrea de Cesaris was Andrea de Cesaris. He constantly retired from races, but his hyper-aggressive driving style did prove beneficial at the Österreich Ring in 1975, where he won in the pouring rain, although he did crash going over the finish line in true chaotic fashion. He would never finish on the podium outside of that race, and this relative anonymity outside of his one great result is why he's a chaotic neutral. He's a perfect chaotic neutral. One good result, and that's it. Jarno Trulli is also in here, in chaotic neutral, a 1-lap pace master, gaining 4 pole positions in 15 seasons, despite only driving 2 race-winning potential cars over his career. He was pretty chaotic in the fact that he would often be lightning fast in qualifying, but in the race often lacked pace and held up faster drivers on him by using his defensive prowess. He often got involved in funny or comical situations, like in Monaco 2010 when he dry-humped Karun Chandok, or in Magny-Cours in 2004 when he was overtaken by Rubens Barrichello at the final corner of the final lap, causing Flavio Briatore to fire him on the spot. He was fairly chaotic on track, and his sole win, despite his many pole positions, is a good example of that. The last chaotic neutral driver is the Swede, Joe Bonnier. I couldn't make it an all-Italian trio, unfortunately, but Bonnier will do. His one win came alongside his 1 pole position in the Netherlands in 1959, and it was the first win for the BRM team. His lack of other podiums, just like Brambilla, shows his relative chaos, and he was a big safety advocate until a crash in the 1972 24 Hours of Le Mans took his life. To be honest, if it wasn't for his Bolt Out of the Blue win in Zandvoort, he could have easily gone in true neutral. However, chaos is defined by either being inconsistent or aggressive, or even both. So he fits here, in chaotic neutral, with Trulli and with Brambilla. What about the drivers who are well loved by the fans, but still showed great driving ability, being champions without being vilified by the media? The epitome of neutral good, of a straight-talking, no-nonsense finish duo of Mika Hakkinen and Kimi Räikkönen. Both Kimi and Mika raced hard but fair. Both had iconic battles with Michael Schumacher and pushed him all the way, and both seemed to be very relatable when speaking with the media. Nondescript or hilariously short answers to interviewers' questions always provoked a laugh from those listening, and even today, both are well liked and respected in F1 circles for their laid-back but hard-working and dedicated style. Another driver who is liked by the fans and proved himself against the best was Jenson Button. The 2009 champion may have stumbled upon his championship somewhat, but his resilience and patience sticking with Honda rewarded him, and in his time against Lewis Hamilton as a teammate, he was equal to or better than the 7-time champion on most occasions. Whether he still with McLaren as they started going downhill because he thought he could help the team turn it around, or if it was just because he saw no other options elsewhere, Jenson was a fantastic driver, even in the latter stages of his career. Even if his one-off Monaco appearance in 2017 ended with a clumsy incident that saw him fail to finish his final F1 race. Kimi, Mika and Jenson are all well liked well into their retirements, and I think this shows their personalities well. This is why they are perfect, neutral good drivers. Now we're on to the final segment of this alignment chart. Chaotic good. This details drivers that had the ability to be the best on their day, but couldn't always keep consistency, or were known for causing chaos in general, whether on track or off track. In my opinion, the poster boy for a chaotic good driver is Jacques Villeneuve. He was damned fast during his short stint in American open wheelers before moving to Williams, where he won his title in 1997. It seemed after then, however, he was completely unable to replicate the form showed in his first 2 years, only notching 4 podiums in the next 9 years before leaving F1 in acrimonious circumstances in 2006. He's undoubtedly a talented driver and has had his fingers in all of the pies of world motorsport. He's done the following: F1, Formula E, NASCAR, IndyCar, V8 supercars, WEC, and most recently Euro NASCAR. His comments off track, which have been seen as cynical by many, have ostracised him from the regular F1 paddock, as most disagree with his hottest of hot takes. While he is very fiery off track, both Jody Scheckter and Eddie Irvine were chaotic on track. Jody's most chaotic moment was most certainly the pileup he caused during the 1973 British Grand Prix, but also he went from winning the championship in 1979 ahead of his tantalising young teammate Gilles Villeneuve, but couldn't match his form the year after in 1980, being cakewalked by Gilles. He was a driver who won for many different teams, Ferrari, Wolf and Tyrrell, and was clearly very talented, but he was inconsistent, and in his early career he was very crash prone. Eddie Irvine was a similar story, although I won't put him on the same level as Scheckter driving-wise. He got punched in the face by Ayrton Senna for unlapping himself in his debut race in Suzuka in 1993 at the behest of the Brazilian. Then, the following year, he became one of only 4 drivers in F1 history to be officially banned from an F1 race following his involvement in a 4-car pileup in Brazil. After that, he'd mostly calmed down, although when he drove for Ferrari, he would go from the role of clear number 2 that he held for 3 years to that of number 1 after Schumacher broke his legs during the 1999 season, and Eddie clearly wasn't ready to step up to that plate as he couldn't beat Mika Hakkinen. His final 3 years with Jaguar showed glimpses of good drives, however there was nothing spectacular before he retired in 2002. His ability to be mediocre most of the time, but quick sometimes, played into his chaoticness, as well as his numerous run-ins early in his career. He was undoubtedly good, but also undoubtedly had numerous flaws as a driver that put him on a level where he was good enough to win races, but not good enough for world championships. Scheckter was just chaotic in the fact that he would cause crashes, he would often be quick sometimes, but not quick in other seasons, and Jacques Villeneuve was good for 2 seasons and then was shit for the next 9 seasons. And he tried a lot of things and only worked in like 1 or 2 of them. He was just chaotic in general. So that's the alignment chart, full and complete. Here it is in its fullest. I hope you all agree with me on my selections for the alignment chart, but if you don't, you can let me know in the comments which drivers I misplaced or missed out. And I can maybe make an update on this video. But without further ado, I've been Nedzo, and I'll see you all soon with another video. Bye!